we have a first-time director. A first-time director who had to go down onto his knees to get the member of cast that he wanted, and then one hell of a controversy blowing up even before the film was in cinemas. Let's dig into the story of 1999's Cruel Intentions, written and directed by Roger Kumble, based on Les Liaisons Dangereuses. My French is just brilliant, isn't it? I knew you were thinking that. And with a cast led by Sarah Michelle Gellar with Ryan Phillip, Reese Witherspoon, Selma Blair, Joshua Jackson, Tara Reid. Also, if you go down the list.
Stories. We would be honoured if you would join us.
So, as Brian Raftery writes in his excellent book, it's a really good book, Best Movie Year Ever, the era of, inverted commas, teen-sploitation films was rife at the end of the 1990s. And so this, I kind of take to mean the kind of horror films that involved young teen actors coming through, but also there were these high school movies as well, and this kind of group of performers all coming through together. For the studios, this was gold. This was a bunch of films that cost, rarely more than $15 million to make, would come up with a handsome return at the box office, and DVD was exploding, so you sat back and counted all the cash. A good example, I mean, the Scream films came out of this era, but also for the purposes of this story, the 1997 horror I Know What You Did Last Summer, which has just been unsuccessfully remade. The Craft was around. Remember The Craft? Clueless as well. It's a great big collection of films. Roger Kumble then was in his early 30s at this stage when he decided to, I'm going to have to pronounce this again, don't judge me, when he decided to take the plunge on a remake of Les Liaisons Dangereuses, Dangerous Liaisons, which had been successfully filmed just a few years before, actually, a decade or so before, as Dangerous Liaisons for directors Stephen Frears, Glenn Close, Michelle Pfeiffer, John Malkovich in that, 7 Oscar nominations, 3 wins. And in fact, within a year of Stephen Frears' Dangerous Liaisons coming out, there was one from Milos Forman of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest fame, who made Valmont, based and inspired on the same story. But go back to Roger Kumble. I mean, there he was in his 30s, and he hadn't made a film. He was writing, as I'm going to come to in a minute. But he was hugely inspired by a 1995 movie from Todd Solondz called Welcome to the Dollhouse. And as Roger Kumble recounted to Cosmopolitan, I cite Cosmopolitan a lot, right? He just said, wow, clucked up high school. I think that's what he said. Never seen this. And he described it as so dark. One of those moments where you're just walking across the street. The idea popped into my head to do Dangerous Liaisons in a high school. And he said, I mulled it over for a year, but going back to Welcome to the Dollhouse, and it's a hell of a film, he said, that movie had an incredible effect on me. I realised you could actually portray high school as mean and truthful. We get that a lot now, less so at the time. So, as quoted in the official press notes, Kumble, the ones that were issued around the time of the film's release, Kumble knew it would be a fight to get a major studio to allow him to direct a film. And he just, as he told the press notes, I planned on writing a really vicious, low-budget, keywords, low-budget, update of Dangerous Liaisons, and then going out, raising $1 million and directing it. And he said, I had no idea it would turn out the way he did. But then his immediate priority around this point was a play he was doing called D-Girl with David Schwimmer. It was his second high-profile play after 1993's play Pay or Play, which is really confusing to say. A play called Pay or Play. And Pay or Play had earned him an award for comic writing from LA Weekly. Now, D-Girl was also picking up gongs, and this was a playwright on the way up. And he had, because he was on the way up in Los Angeles as well, around Hollywood, so he was getting the attention and getting the interest of agents and studios. And so he knew he had a moment. He had this moment where the attention was on him, and he needed to kind of seize that moment. So he did what most of us would do. He went to Mexico for a couple of weeks and went and wrote Cruel Intentions, or Cruel Inventions, as it was originally. It took him 12 days-ish to do the first draft. I think it was 97 he did that. There's still, of course, a way to go because he'd still never made a film. But it was a producer by the name of Heather Zegan who would connect Roger Kumble to the person who could get Cruel Inventions made. Now, producer Neil Moritz is a man who's done a fair few remakes. I'm going to get through this with a straight face. Who's done a fair few remakes under the banner of his production company, which is called Original Film. However, in the 1990s, he was a producer very much on the way up. And his big breakthrough hit was I Know What You Did Last Summer, which gave him a box office hit with Scottish director Jim Gillespie, Ryan Phillip and Sarah Michelle Gellar were in that, and it was Heather Zegan who put Neil Moritz and Roger Kumble together. They had a conversation, and I mean, this was starting to get somewhere because Neil Moritz had a relationship with Sony, and all of a sudden the pieces were kind of falling roughly into some degree of place. It was Moritz then who said, well, why don't you go and meet Ryan Phillip, Sarah Michelle Gellar, see if they're interested. Is it Philip or Philippe? I'm going with Philip just for this. Sorry, Ryan, if you're watching. And a meeting was arranged, and it didn't take long for Gellar and Ryan to sign up to this particular project, Cruel Inventions. And that was 2 of the 3 key roles in the film sorted. I'd say 4 key roles, really. I'm just going back. 2 of the 4 key roles in the film sorted. And I don't know, I think this was sort of starting to move at some degree of speed, because Kumble was also, under the terms of this deal that was being struck with Sony in the end, going to be able to direct the film. Now, Sarah Michelle Gellar at this point had built her audience up with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, a very heroic role, and she was keen to get involved, but in the less heroic role in Cruel Inventions. And she was kind of resisting the kind of goody-goody part in the film. And as she put it, that she'd come out of soap operas before she got to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and she was used to playing less savoury parts in soap operas. But the audience didn't really know her for that, because there she was, this huge breakout TV star hero. So, Gellar was just around, I think she was just around 20 at the point that she signed up to Cruel Inventions. And I mean, going back to Brian Raftery's excellent book, Gellar eventually persuaded the producers to cast her in the role of Catherine. And so, as Raftery writes, it was a decision that rattled executives at the television network, the WB, not to mention her representatives. And Gellar is quoted as saying, "My manager said, people are starting to love you. Why would you want to ruin it?" The manager and her parted company not long afterwards. And also Joss Whedon, for it is he, the creator of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and there's a man whose star has fallen. Look him up if you don't know why. He wasn't particularly pleased at the idea of her doing Cruel Intentions. He would describe the film as, quote, porny, Porny, before the release of the film. And as Gellar said, I was mad at him for that, but I don't think he'd seen the movie at that time. And Sarah Michelle Gellar said, Cruel was very personal to me because it was the first time I'd been given really adult material. Not like that. Now, the third key role would go to Reese Witherspoon. And again, Reese Witherspoon, an actor on the way up at this point, and taking some really interesting roles on at that stage in her career as well. But it did take some persuading to get her involved, because the character of Annette, who she would take on in Cruel Intentions, had been really difficult to cast in the first place. And Ryan Phillip had been going to Roger Kumble's house to read with an assortment of candidates for the part. But the right person had to kind of fit 2 criteria. Number one, it had to be someone Kumble wanted in the film, but also the studio was getting a little bit picky about who it wanted. So Katie Holmes was the studio choice at this point. Smart choice, particularly at that stage as well. And I mean, they still weren't best pleased about the role that Sarah Michelle Gellar was in. And I think Roger Kumble mentioned someone called Vanessa Shaw, who was on her way up at that point as well. But it was Reese Witherspoon, who happened to be in a relationship with Ryan Phillip, who ultimately their attention would zero in on. And so that, I mean, we're at early 1998 now. And I mean, Reese Witherspoon, I don't know if you ever saw the film Freeway. I mean, that's one hell of a movie to have early on your CV. And it proves that she wasn't averse to edgy material as well. And so she was offered the role of Annette in Cruel Intentions. She turned it down, and she just wasn't happy with it. And so in the end, Kumble would have to rewrite it. And as he told Cosmopolitan, basically, we took Reese out to dinner to get her drunk, and we ended up getting drunk. And he says, I literally got down on my knees and begged her. And Kumble said to Witherspoon, please, it'll be 15 days. You'll be great. And Witherspoon in the end was like, I'll do it, but we need to work on the character. And Kumble, anything. And as he explained, she wanted to strengthen the character, and she was right. And so Witherspoon and Kumble got together and gave Annette more bite. So, quote, she wasn't a doormat. And Kumble said, I'm very grateful to her for that. Now, Selma Blair writes in her memoir, Mean Baby, about the fact that pretty much every young actor knew of this script, Cruel Inventions, at the time. And in her words, in her book, she describes it as a big clucking deal in young Hollywood. I think that's what it says. The font was difficult to read. And she says everyone was talking about it, buzzing about it, speculating about it. Now, it was still, there was a kind of a tricky edge to it, because a lot of the people who were interested in roles in the film were late teens, early 20s. Selma Blair was heading towards her mid-20s at that point. So, I mean, it was a high school movie, but also it's a high school movie with some blue bits to it, some slightly naughty bits to it. And that was causing a degree of concern as well. And so it got to a point where trying to fill the role that Selma Blair took on wasn't really that easy. And she talks in her book about she got to her mid-20s and she was getting bit parts in things, but she really wanted this one. And she felt that if she didn't get Cruel Inventions, it might be time to knock things on the head. And so Blair was the oldest member in the end of the key young ensemble in the film. And Roger Kumble would talk about it was the smartest audition I've ever seen in my career when she went in to read for him. And he says, I remember having to ask all the actors coming in how old they were because of a scene of, I mean, it's a scene of assault. I mean, there's no way around it. I'm going very, very spoiler light, but it's a really unpleasant scene in the film. And so Kumble was like, well, we're going to shoot it, but it's got to be dicey. It's got to be right. And we can't have someone underage in that scene. And so they were auditioning young actors, bringing them in. And he said they were all good. But I remember Selma Blair came in and Kumble said to her, how old are you? And she said, how old are you? And as Kumble said, she was so obnoxious and I couldn't get it out of my head. She came into the audition as the character and didn't show me that there was Selma. And I just said, there's the person. That's who it was. That's the story he told to Cosmo. Now, Selma Blair's take on it in her book says, I did the audition using the same energy he brought out in me. She says, I wasn't angry. I wasn't combative. I was just a little bit fed up. I'd done 7 auditions that week without being noticed. I felt I had nothing to lose. And Blair said, a little mean baby came out of me, but she saved the day because she made him listen. I suppose Roger realised that this was the saving grace of the character of Cecile. She didn't have to be the sad victim. And so a couple of days after the audition, Kumble and Blair would meet a few days later and the deal was done. There were the 4 main members of the cast. Now, Roger Kumble was still a new director. And so, I mean, he put together, Neil Moritz, if we go back to him, he was on a run. He did 7 films in a row, I think, with first-time directors. But, I mean, crucially here, he knew how to put together a production team for a new filmmaker. And he said, we knew Roger was prepared to direct since he'd worked in theatre. But also, they knew that they needed a support team around him, experienced people. So in came Theo van der Sande as the cinematographer. Jeff Freeman comes in to edit. And, I mean, a bunch of experienced people, not least production designer John Gary Steele. And part of the pre-production was getting the look of Cruel Intentions, as you would expect, on a relatively light budget. And what John Gary Steele went for was something against the look of the high school movie a little bit. He wanted it darker. He wanted to reflect the tone of the film and kind of the darker corners that the story was going into. And so, I mean, John Gary Steele, as per the press notes, quote, created an overall look for the film that paid homage to the original novel. This was still based on pre-existing text. The interior sets of the Valmont townhouse were built and shot in LA, but with a bit of a French twist. And as Steele says, most of the story takes place in modern day New York. But when you walked into the Valmont townhouse, I wanted you to feel like you were walking into a Parisian even ballroom. Darker colours used throughout the film. And I mean, Steele saw it as a tragedy and he wanted to lean into the fact that it was a tragedy. And so that was what was informing his production design of the film. Now, the shoot of Cruel Intentions ran from June the 9th, 1998 to July the 15th, 1998. Just over a month, a fairly thin production, really, based in New York and Los Angeles. It didn't stray out of those 2 places, really. And the shooting began. It was under that original title, Cruel Inventions. The V would change to a T, but I think Sarah Michelle Gellar posted on her Instagram feed them coming together for a meal the night before the start of shooting, and there is a script with Cruel Inventions written on the front of it. But it was, I mean, Witherspoon at this point was talking, I mean, she talked to Brian Raftery about a very, very difficult scene that they had to shoot, Ryan Phillip and Reese Witherspoon. And she talked about how I'm going really spoiler light again, we've been living together for a year and a half and Ryan wanted me to hit him really hard and I think I hurt his ear. And once filming on this particular really intense argument was complete, Ryan Phillip threw up. vomited. And as he said, I was probably just being a dramatic a-hole and indulging in the moment because it was his real-life girlfriend at that point. There was fruity material in the film, and inevitably a burden, rightly, a burden of responsibility on Roger Kumble and his team. This was an era before intimacy coordinators as well. And I mean, as such, when it came to shooting some of those moments, it was a case of you get everything set up and clear the set as much as humanly possible. That's the way they approached it. There's also a very famous kissing scene in Cruel Intentions between Selma Blair and Sarah Michelle Gellar. And I mean, that one was on location. It was harder for people not to see it, and it would become a point of contention ahead of the release of the movie. It's also a very, very famous moment in the film. And Blair said, in her book, I wasn't that nervous about kissing Sarah, but I was eager for the scene to be over and done with because we both knew it was going to be somewhat sensational, and there was pressure on us to pull it off, and we wanted to get it right, certainly. But how do I put this delicately? The saliva was unplanned. If you've seen the film, you know what I mean. There was also, she said, actually, one instance where I felt remotely cool, because in her book, she talks about just almost being in awe of Reese Witherspoon on the set of the film. But there was a moment where, I mean, this was a Sony film, and Sony's big summer movie that year was Roland Emmerich's Godzilla. Do you remember that? Written by Dean Devlin, directed by Emmerich, Matthew Broderick leading the cast. And Selma Blair just said the cast and crew went to New York for the bit of the shoot, and one night we all went out to the Godzilla premiere. There's a lovely story that Sarah Smith tells when she was at Aardman and Aardman at this point was having its films distributed by Sony Pictures. Sony had Quantum of Solace out and invited the Aardman team down to London to the Quantum of Solace premiere, and as such there's a busload of Aardman people getting changed on the bus to go to a big glitzy James Bond premiere and then back to Bristol. The case of Cruel Intentions, they're getting all dressed up. Prada lent me a dress, said Selma Blair, and then they back off after a night indulging in the joys of Roland Emmerich's Godzilla, back straight on the set and filming Cruel Intentions. Cost around 11 million in the end to shoot the film and to get the negative locked. Heading into post-production, there were some bumps in getting some of the music that Roger Kumble wanted, but the controversy and the difficulty was going to come with that kiss. And it seems quite quaint now, really, but in 1999, as the film was preparing for its release, this was a really, really big deal, and there was an uproar. Now, behind me are a bunch of old film magazines, including Premiere magazine, and Premiere magazine, a brilliant US magazine, much missed, was running like big feature on this kiss and how, according to Premiere, the movie's sexed up scenes had, quote, launched 1,000 closed-door meetings at the WB because young performers who were in these savoury family shows were now, heaven forbid, they were abrasing each other's clothes. How's that? How would it reflect? What would happen? And so there was a lot of unrest. There was a lot of controversy. And as Roger Kumble remembered as well, when it got to actually the opening weekend for Cruel Intentions, he said there were signs at theatres that said, "We will not sell tickets to Cruel Intentions if you're under 17." Now, this was an R-rated movie. So under American law, you could go if you were under 17, as long as you had someone with you. I remember an adult with you. I remember being in America when Django Unchained opened, the Tarantino film, and going to an American multiplex which just said, "We don't admit under 14s for the 10 p.m. showing." I mean, that's how liberal it all was. But in the American rating system and the American media, violence absolutely fine. A little bit nooky. Oh, no, not allowed that. And so this was like triggering like the very respectable and absolutely not two-faced press at the time. But by the time it actually got to the release, the WB had relaxed enough to allow the adverts to run. And for Sony, it was rubbing its hands with glee because it had a conversation point. Its film was like the most talked about. It only cost like 11 million to make. It ramped up the marketing. The movie went into cinemas at the start of March 1999. The reception of it was just like, I mean, it's just a bit in the middle, really. I really like the reviews that just like criticised it for like having some rude bits in it as well. I think it was, I mean, Roger Ebert went for it. He was one of the people who praised it, but generally it was sort of in the middle, that people weren't going out of their way. I always thought Cruel Intentions was quite a smart take on Dangerous Liaisons. And also, I mean, if you're going to go all posh and stuff, made the text of the original book really accessible to people who might not otherwise have given it a try. Still, as always, middling critics. All right, what happens at the box office? So, the American release, March the 5th to the 7th, 1999. I've got the chart here. The opening film at number 1 that weekend was Analyze This, starring Robert De Niro and Billy Crystal, directed by Harold Ramis, wasn't it? Opened with 18.3 million, but Cruel Intentions was in second place with 13 million. Remember, the negative had cost 11. By the time this film was done, it was going to be in profit, even before it got anywhere near the DVD release. Sony had another release the week before, 8mm, which was the edgy Joel Schumacher, Nicolas Cage thriller, which if it had been good, would have been a lot more successful. Other movies around at this point, The Other Sister, Payback, October Sky, My Favourite Martian, Message in a Bottle, underrated Costner film there, Shakespeare in Love, and She's All That, which was another teen movie that cleaned up early in 1999. But Cruel Intentions was off to a good start. And, I mean, the word of mouth on it was good enough that the box office drop was just 46% on its second weekend. I will say the box office drop on Analyze This was just 15%, but still 46%. That's fine. Sony quite happy. On its second weekend, the other big opener was The Rage, Carrie 2. Who remembers that? Exactly 7 million. Cruel Intentions down to 3. Other films out were The Corruptor, Baby Geniuses, The Deep End of the Ocean, and how about this, the Wing Commander movie? I've got to come to that at some point. Cruel Intentions hung around, though. I mean, Ben Affleck and Sandra Bullock in True Crime were out the following week. Clint Eastwood thriller, a really tepid Clint Eastwood thriller, True Crime, was following. But Cruel Intentions was still hanging in the top 10 by the end of March as films like the underrated Ed TV, the film that absolutely had its oxygen taken away by The Truman Show, The Mod Squad, Doug's first movie. But 4 weeks in, Cruel Intentions, 33 million in the bank, still in the top 10. It would finally drop out as things like The Matrix came along, 10 Things I Hate About You. What a year 1999 was. The US, in the end, the US box office returns for Cruel Intentions, by the time it had done 38 million at the US box office, 37 million overseas, 75 million total worldwide for this modest 11 million film, and then a big DVD hit as well. A big DVD hit, enough that there were plans for more of this. Efforts went into a spin-off TV series that was going by the name of Manchester Prep. However, after 3 episodes of this were made, and Amy Adams is in it, it's sort of a prequel thing, Manchester Prep. Amy Adams cast in it, decided, no, don't want the TV series, and so it was cobbled together into a straight-to-DVD sequel to Cruel Intentions, which came out in 2001. Then, a few years later, 2004, we got another straight-to-DVD sequel, Cruel Intentions 3. None of these films had any of the original cast involved. However, Cruel Intentions 2 was written and directed by Roger Kumble. He didn't direct the third film. And then there have been all sorts of other attempts to bring this back. So there has been a musical that came out in 2015. There was another attempt to bring it to television in 2015. I think it got a pilot order, that, but they never got taken to a full series. And now there is, courtesy of Prime Video, a new reboot series, which, again, Roger Kumble is, I mean, he's on the outskirts of, really. That came out on Prime Video in 2024. For all the conversation around it, it's still the original Cruel Intentions that continues to cut through. A lot of the controversy about it is quite quaint now, but I sort of miss this era where a film that grossed 80-90 million at the worldwide box office is still being talked about, is still being explored, 30 odd years later. And there is like a gap. Films like this, I'm recording this in the summer of 2025, films like this aren't made very often now. I think they should be. I think as much as Blumhouse has managed to commandeer the idea of making horror films for under $10 million, can someone have a go at making like comedies like this or dramas like this, similar kind of budget, get them into cinemas and see what happens? Worked out quite well, after all, for Cruel Intentions.